Hey everybody, today we're talking with Anthony Labriola of the Long Island Puppet Theater. Anthony, thanks for joining us.
David, Michael, thank you guys so much for having me. This is awesome. I'm glad you guys are able to get this set up, especially, in our quarantine conditions right now, being able to do this over Zoom is awesome.
Cool. Yeah, we think it's a cool project, and we really thank you for taking the time out to talk to us. Just to start our conversation off, why don't you just give us a little background about yourself, your theater history, any history that you want to tell us about how you found theater, and how you eventually found yourself as the head of the Long Island Puppet Theater.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, especially from what I understand about the relationship that you two have together, David, you started as Michael's teacher, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And honestly, my whole journey coming up to here, it's all about having great teachers. I went into high school. I wasn't crazy interested in theater, but I went to Holy Trinity here in Hicksville. And I had David Overton was my theater teacher there, and he was just somebody who took a chance on me, saw that there was something that I could be doing when it came to theater, even though I wasn't really, I wasn't great at memorization, definitely got stage fright pretty easily, but it was through working with him and him taking the time to see where I fit best in theater that I really got more comfortable on stage and having a presence in theater. From there, I guess a little bit before there, I saw my first show here at the Long Island Puppet Theater under the old owners the year that it opened in 1998. And I fell in love with puppetry. I knew that that was something that I wanted to be doing. How I went about getting there, I had no idea what I was going to do. But when I was old enough to work and I got my working papers, also around the time I started high school, the time I started theater, I came up here and I just kind of begged them for a job. And that's where doing puppetry started for me. And then blending that with theater started, and working with David at Trinity. In my senior year, we did Little Shop of Horrors, and that was like everything to me, because I got to be the puppeteer for Audrey 2. And that was like, this is where you fit into theater. Maybe not, directly on stage, even though I've gotten way more comfortable now, but I really got to feel it out and do something big with Audrey 2.
Cool. Conan, do you want to tell him, I see your face, about how you started too?
Oh yeah, my first theater experience was Little Shop of Horrors, and
it's such a fun show.
Yeah, I got sucked in ninth grade, and I got The Dentist.
Oh, awesome!
No experience before, and that was it for me too. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's hard to come down from a show like that. It's so much fun. It's so engaging with, especially the bond you develop with your cast. I still keep in touch with a lot of people who I did that show with, and that was 11 years ago, I think, at this point.
Oh. What was it about what captured your imagination when you went in there? What about puppetry got you, do you think? Now that you look back at it in retrospect, are you able to maybe think why it was?
It's definitely something that makes more sense retrospectively than in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But now being here, being where I am, working with kids, I write all the shows here, I build all the puppets here.
Wow.
Everything is very hands-on. So I'm directly interacting with that experience that kids are having when they come to the theater, kids and adults. I've been doing across the board here. But there's something about puppetry, and it's almost the same as when we're watching cartoons or animated films, TV series. There's a level of disconnect, and you stop focusing on the world around you and what we know about reality, and you're in this complete world of fantasy, and your characters can be anything. They can be talking animals, they can be monsters, but the experiences they have are incredibly human. They're things that everyone of all ages can relate to. So it's a matter of telling those stories in a way that doesn't make you have to be totally focused on the gripping reality of it, but you can go back into reality with that experience and with seeing what these characters have learned from the experiences they've had and how that relates to the experiences we have with each other.
Right. And how do you find that do you find that through puppets, it's easier to tell stories like that than being a human being on a stage and trying to tell a similar story?
I do. I think when it comes to being a puppeteer, being able to disconnect from myself as well, it's easier to create an experience that may be a little bit more out of this world for people to believe when it's being portrayed through a puppet or some other character. I also recognize that with my younger audience, with kids, they're more apt to pay attention and listen when something that they've never seen before is conveying the information to them. I do a tour before the show, doing a little bit of history of puppetry, and then I go into the show itself, and the tour is all me. So I've got their attention. I know that they're listening to me, but then I start to bring out the puppets and I incorporate them, sort of like this slow transition out of the reality we know and into the world of the puppet theater. And I recognize they're more engaged with the puppets. They want to be a part of this world of fantasy and this magic.
What? All right, so if I was the kid, which I pretty much am in this situation because I don't know much about the history of puppetry, what would you tell me quickly about it?
So I have a showcase full of puppets from all around the world. And so I usually start with some characters they recognize, like Pinocchio, one of the most famous puppets of all time. And they start to, if they've seen the movie or they've heard the story, they'll start to chime in with what they know about it. So it becomes a dialogue. It's not just giving the information forward. So I start to ask them what they know, and then I start to incorporate some of the things about where the puppet came from, so that they are kind of getting into the idea of how globally puppetry is. And then we get into some of the history of that particular story and how the culture surrounding it and the time period surrounding when the story was written affects how the story is told, and then how it's transformed over time. I think Pinocchio is one of the greatest elements for that because it's so well known, and I can really jump off on having that conversation.
Wow. So where did you learn your craft, Anthony? Like, how did you learn to make the puppets? Where did it come from?
So the puppet making, I learned hands-on being here. I started working here at around 13 years old, and it was sort of a whole training process of learning how the shows work. So I'd be watching them before I learned to operate the puppets that we already had. So I was learning things like how to operate a marionette and how to operate a hand puppet. Then from there, after doing the shows, it would come down to things like repairs, regular maintenance on the puppets to make sure that they can perform the best that they can on stage. So that meant restringing marionettes, that meant restitching some of the hand puppets. So it was almost like a dissecting process. I had to learn where each string functioned for each piece of each different marionette, why our mermaid functions differently from the prince in the same story. So it really became about understanding intimately movement. And that's where things like dance and choreography become important, because you start to see how our bodies function and how to create that believable response. And you've got to make that fluid and believable in the puppets that you're working with as well.
Wow.
I was telling Dave, we don't have to build our actors. I feel like, man, I give you.
Oh, I mean, that's kind of interesting that he said that. And like after he said that, I thought, well, that's kind of true. But in the same time, we do have to build our actors. Like my career is to teach theater. So. When I get a kid who's 11, 12 years old, who's never been on stage for the first time, I mean,
you're building up your actor, I guess, right?
I'm building an actor from a person, and just like Anthony said, you have to teach, movement and expression, and it's almost like the same thing. I kind of feel like, what you do with a puppet and how you bring life to that. And I'm not saying that my actors are puppets, but what I'm saying is that the methodology behind teaching the student how to act and creating the actor out of the person and making them aware of their movement and their voice is a very similar type of thing, I think. And that and you, Anthony, are the person who's giving life to these puppets, and you have to make sure that there's a reality that comes through them, which is very similar in the way that I would create a show with a student.
I absolutely agree. And I have so much respect for directors because it's different when you have a living, breathing human being. They're aware, they're paying attention, they get self-conscious, they are understanding the depths of their mental and emotional capacity. And like you said, you're building them up. You're building them into not just a person, but an actor. You have to be aware of movement, mannerism, character building. And that it's an incredible process. So major respect to you guys for taking on directing people. Me, I understand how they move, but there's no back talk. There's no sort of having to go into the emotional depths and dredge that out of a character. I build it, I perform it, and that's it.
Is there a style of puppetry you prefer, or are you just, I mean, between like the marionettes and the hand puppets, and I mean, is there one that you prefer over the other, or just a general love?
I think it depends on the story that I'm telling. I definitely have a
Okay.
general love for all the different styles of puppetry I've worked with, and I do try and experiment with a little bit of everything. My favorite way to tell a story is through marionettes. I like to do it like a storybook, and I think that's a great way to convey a message, to convey a story, and to build a world of fantasy. I love hand puppets for when I'm out in the public performing. They're easy to take with me, and you just sort of have that free reign. And you'll notice people start to disconnect you from the puppets, so you can have a dialogue, and people are apt to believe it. And I think shadow puppetry is one of the most beautiful forms of puppetry I've ever seen.
Oh, right, yes.
And that's something I would love to know more about and get better at. I've done one or two shadow puppet shows in the past, but it's nothing compared to some of the other puppeteers that I've seen doing shadow puppetry.
Gosh, I didn't even think about shadow puppetry. You're right. That has to be one of the oldest kind of forms of storytelling in a way.
It is. I believe it's actually the oldest form of puppetry, because it was done traditionally with animal hide, and the hide would be tanned and turned to leather, and they would build their puppets from that and use the shadows cast off of campfires to convey some of these usually religious and spiritual stories, these questions about the mythology of mankind.
It's like the first television. Do you do your shows by yourself, Anthony, or do you have other puppeteers with you?
Depending on the show that I'm doing, I'll usually have one or two other puppeteers with me. Things like our hand puppet shows, I'll do the traditional Punch and Judy story. That's something that I do entirely by myself. I don't need more than myself to perform that. Our marionette shows, I try and do them on a bigger scale to create a full world of fantasy. So that's usually myself and my youngest brother, he's about 10 years younger than me. He comes in and performs with me for those, and it'll usually be the two of us. But this past winter, we kept the tradition of telling winter ghost stories, and we did a full stage adaptation of a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle ghost story, and that we did with people and puppets. And I think I had four actors for that.
Oh, so you have directed people before?
Yes, it is a vastly different world.
How do you juggle that?
Oh,
how do you juggle directing people and also, I guess, directing puppets or creating individual characters through puppets? Like, how do you find that balance?
That was definitely a challenge for me in making that transition. Like I said, major props to directors, because I sat there second guessing myself more than my actors some of the times. Because like, okay, am I doing everything that I can to bring out what they need to be portraying for this character? Always making sure that my actors are comfortable with everything that we're exploring. A big part of it was sort of like what we talked about before, getting to the heart and core of what it means to be human, and how those human experiences translate into the movement of some of our puppets and some of the characters that they portray. With the actors, our story was a bit over the top, so it was more about making sure that the way that they were conveying their dialogue was the real element, and the way that they were conveying their mannerisms was the entertaining element. And then when it came to bringing the puppets on board, we created almost this divide between the real world and the fantasy world. Our puppets then became these characters that, while they are inhuman, they tended to portray the more of the real human elements of the story that we were telling. So it was really about getting them to sort of recognize that divide in themselves and where we go from having fun to telling a serious story.
Sounds to me a little bit like the way the Muppets do it, like when you have puppets and people like together in the same universe.
Absolutely. And the thing I love about the way the Muppets and Sesame Street do that is the puppet bridges the gap between the audience and the performance. There's the puppet sitting there asking questions that the audience is thinking to themselves. So you're allowed to kind of bridge that gap and make everybody feel like they're part of this world as well. And having the humans interact with the puppets, you already feel like I can exist alongside this creature.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah, my dad worked on Sesame Street for a while as a camera guy, and I would go there a few times growing up, and it was the same thing. I knew there was people there, but I was still looking at the puppet.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Did you this is a little off topic, but have you gone to the Jim Henson's exhibit?
Yes, I loved seeing the exhibit. They did such a great job with that.
Yeah.
I waited until I finished watching Dark Crystal Age of Resistance to go, because
Nice.
they have the Age of Resistance exhibit there. And his story is just amazing from start to finish. And the original designs of some of his puppets, and knowing that Kermit came from a coat first.
Yeah.
Puppetry is so much about being resourceful. I have puppets that are built out of just scrap material and all sorts of different things.
Wow. When you perform, do you have like is there a barrier that hides the human actor from the audience, or are you just right there with the puppet and the audience can fully see you?
We've got a 3-tier stage set up. About 10 feet wide is our main stage, and that's where our live actors will be. If I'm using some of my bigger puppets, like a hand puppet or some of our Bunraku style puppets, which is sort of full body puppetry, the actors are full out on stage with the puppets there. But we go 1 tier back from there, and we have just a divide, and that's where some of our hand puppet shows will take place, so the actor can just hide behind there and there's no focus on them. Okay. And then we have 1 more tier behind there, which is a separate set of curtains, and we have a bridge above it and a pit below it. That's where we do our marionette shows. The bridge allows us to stand over and hang our marionettes down, and the pit allows us to go under and work with hand and rod puppets.
Oh wow! Oh wow! How deep is that stage?
I want to say it's probably about 15 feet deep. Once you get toward the last 2 tiers, it's very shallow. There's not a lot of movement room. But the first tier, the wider 10 feet, that kind of takes up the most of it. And we'll use that. It doubles as our dance floor for our birthday parties, and just a general platform for any other events that we're having there.
Oh, wow. Is this primarily for kids, the theater, or do you have like adult shows also?
Since I've taken over, I've been trying to divide the mornings for our kids shows and the evenings for our adult shows. I do try and make sure that even in our kids shows, I'm writing something that is for all ages. I never want my younger audience to feel like they're being talked down to. And I never want my older audience to feel like they're watching something that's geared toward an audience so much younger than them. Okay. So you'll catch some jokes here that are geared to the adults, and the kids will miss it because it's a double entendre. Or just things like the general complexity of the characters and what they're going through. It's something that kids experience, but now they can put words to it. For the adult shows, I've been focusing more on working with other entertainers around the island. We bring in a ton of performers. We do monthly vaudeville showcases where we just bring back that classic vaudeville style. I bring in performers, singers, balloon artists, magicians, clowns. So we're all together up on that stage, and it's mostly family friendly, but the entertainment is definitely geared more toward the adults.
Yeah. what does an adult puppet show look like?
Um, it looks about the same as a kids show, but it's more the subject matter and how far we allow the puppets to go with that subject matter.
Okay.
I do 2 different versions of my Punch and Judy show, and there's the family-friendly one where I've even kind of toned down on the traditional violence of the show.
Mhm.
Punch and Judy is very slapstick heavy, and of course that appeals to all ages, but it doesn't always convey the best message.
Mhm.
So we've created situational humor that kids and adults can enjoy. For the kids' situational humor, it tends to be a misunderstanding. For the adult situational humor, it tends to be getting in deep with either trouble with the law or trouble with some characters who aren't exactly family friendly anymore.
Okay.
Can I ask, because this I really respect, how did you go about, or how was it introduced to you, the idea of becoming the owner and continuing this legacy? How did that go about? Because I think that's really cool.
So I took over 4 years ago now, almost 5 years ago now. And in between high school and college, I went to school for film and television writing, and it became my focus to incorporate film and puppetry, kind of go that Jim Henson style, that Fred Rogers style, where I can convey these messages on a grander scale. But I was working in film at the time, and focusing a little bit less on my puppetry, just sort of doing monthly shows in the city, little one-off 10-minute, one-act performances here and there. But in 2015, the previous owners had reached out to me about retiring. They had been doing this for 98 to 2015. I'm terrible at math. But yeah, they were doing it from 98 to 2015, and they were getting on in age. And puppetry is definitely very physically taxing, especially being cramped into some of the smaller spaces that we've got, from our pit to being wedged in the back of our bridge. So they reached out to me about taking over. We're kind of Long Island's last standing puppet theater. There's a couple traveling theaters. There are a couple of companies that are puppet theater heavy. Goat on a Boat is a fantastic resource for puppetry as well. The Long Island Children's Museum is a fantastic resource for puppetry. But between the 3 of us, it's really it. And then there's performers who just will go out and do their shows. So it was kind of the option of Long Island loses its last standing puppet theater or somebody takes over. And that's always been a dream of mine, to have my own theater, to do this. It's why I started it as soon as I was able to start working. But I didn't expect it to come as soon as it did.
No one ever does. No one ever does. Wow, 5 years. So I'm going to kind of, unless Mike, you have a question or anything? I want to kind of change gears just slightly.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a good segue into it. So it's been constantly. Is it a 12-month a year thing? The puppet theater.
We're all year round. We do shows 6 days a week, open to the public. Our traditional hours are 1:30 and 3:30 Tuesday through Sunday. But those are subject to change based on whether or not we get our minimum number of reservations or we get booked out privately. We do tend to get booked out privately a lot for kids' parties, school groups, summer camps, Boy Scouts and Girl Scout troops. But we also extend our hours for groups like that. We try and keep our private performances as away from our public performances as much as we can to keep those open to people.
Okay. So I mean, obviously, you've obviously been shuttered the last couple of months, right?
Yeah, the quarantine's been a little bit crazy.
Yeah. Well, you're in there. You're in there now. I mean, obviously, you can be in there. Can you just take us through what that is like as a theater owner, like somebody who, owns an actual piece of real estate that people go to? Like we do theater, but we can do theater through Zoom because I don't own any real estate in theater. Like, it's just a production company. So like, I don't understand what those challenges would be like, but I'm curious as somebody who has those challenges right now. Maybe from the business perspective, I'm just curious if you could just kind of take us through what that's been like for you and what you see for the future, and like if you have a plan of action.
Sure. This has definitely been a strange time above all else. It's been difficult, but strange more than anything. Nobody could have predicted this was how things were going to go. We were on the verge of our best year when we got shut down to make sure that everybody stays safe. But so I own the theater, but I rent the building. So that's even more of a challenge than if I had owned the building itself. So I'm more of a production company than just a theater.
Gotcha.
But so the reason that we have things like our minimum reservation cap, even just for our business model on any given day, it's more to make sure that we're always meeting our overhead. Overhead makes it that much more difficult to run 12 months a year, to run 6 days a week. We've always got to make sure that we're making more than what our electric bills are going to be per performance. We've always got to make sure that at the end of the month, we've done enough parties and enough private shows that we're making the theater's rent. But right now, with everything at a total standstill, the rent is still expected, but we're not making anything right now. I've done a few different things, resorting to whatever other skills I have to make sure that I'm making as much as I can to cover the bills and cover as much of the rent as I can during this time. I've been doing freelance writing work because I write all the shows here. So just picking up anything that I can to make sure that, this is my pride and joy. This is my primary source of income. And at the end of the day, it is my biggest responsibility. I've got to make sure that its needs are met.
Yeah. What do you look for in the future? Like, what kind of plan have you put in place to sort of bring it back?
So I'm a little worried about what's going to happen in the immediate future for us, because we're coming toward the end of our current lease, which means sitting down and renegotiating. But first, that means catching up to where we need to be from the 3 months that we've been down. And it looks like, since we're in the 4th phase of the reopening plan, it's not looking like that's going to happen until about August. So that's another two months that we're going to be down. So we're going to have a lot to make up for and a lot to catch up with before we're really planning too much further ahead. But the first step is going to be renegotiating our lease, figuring out how we can do something that's best for us and the landlord company to keep things going the way that they are now. But upon the 4th phase of reopening, we know that we're going to be faced with sort of reduced admission and reduced size. We're a pretty big space for what people expect for a puppet theater, but people are also still expecting a puppet theater. So we're a small space. Our capacity is not more than maybe about 60. So we know that we're going to be reduced to about half or less, just to keep enforcing social distancing, which means we're going to be upping the number of performances that we do to make up for sort of not being able to have as many people per performance. So we'll probably open to about 3 or 4 shows a day. Then we're going to be doing reduced admission in the beginning to make sure that people are more comfortable, because everybody's taken a hit during this whole pandemic. So we want our customers to be comfortable. We want them to feel comfortable that, like, this is a place you can come and spend an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's not going to break the bank to take the family out for the day. So reduced admission, increased performance numbers, and just kind of riding it out until we can get back to our normal, and trying to figure out how we can use that time to come up with different ways of performing. I tried going live and doing live streaming during the pandemic. That was a great way to just get people aware of where we are and what we're doing, and sort of our way to give back to the community. We did a fully free performance. We wanted people to have a way to entertain the kids during this time, especially because they're not fully understanding of what's happening. Right. But afterwards, we're going to try and find ways to maybe do sort of like a rent-a-show performance, where you can rent a virtual show, and that'll increase our reach to more than just Long Island. we're also going to be trying to find ways to make our shows more portable. We don't really do too much traveling. It's hard for us as a small group to go out, leave the main base, and go to all the travel performances we get requested to do. But given where this has put us right now and being not able to operate at all during this time, it's definitely time to rethink being able to travel.
Interesting.
I think that's great that you were doing the shows online for kids, especially since, like you said, they don't really understand what's fully going on. I had a quick little flashback in my head from when I watched Won't You Be My Neighbor for like the 18th time. I love that. But I get it. It's a weird balancing act, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely important to make sure that, the community comes first, the kids come first. They're our primary audience. We want to make sure that they're safe, happy, and comfortable, especially in times where the main reaction is fear. They wake up every morning, they've got to put a mask on, and they don't fully understand why they've got to wear a mask. So our goal is to figure out how we can make masks fun. We'll talk about things like Commedia dell'arte theater and, what you can do to make your mask yours.
Smart.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea. Do you anticipate bringing some of that into the live shows when they come back? Like to try to keep the thread going? Because obviously masks are going to be required when they come to see your shows again.
Yeah, we do anticipate doing things like we do puppet building days. So I may transition that into doing some sort of mask building days, like, how to incorporate your protective mask into a traditional theater mask.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, so what else do you do? Like you mentioned the puppet building days and some travel stuff, like slight, but what other things do you do besides the main shows? Like where, like, your puppet building days sounds really cool. Like, is there other activities or, I don't know, other things that you do to kind of fill the hours of a 7-day work week?
Absolutely. We do try and do things like regular craft days. So we'll do things like different styles of puppetry, different levels of puppetry. So beginner and intermediate experience, really relying on what sort of tools we're going to need to use. I never feel comfortable working with, fabric cutting scissors when I'm working with the younger kids. But when I start to get into the older kids working with me, they'll be able to do things like, a traditional felt hand puppet. Whereas the younger kids will work with things like paper mache or clay, or do a simple sock puppet. During the Halloween season, my favorite time of year, we'll do things like pumpkin paint parties. We do parties that are open to the public to get a feel for what our birthday parties are like. Our Halloween bash is our biggest bash every year. Our New Year's Eve probably comes second closest to that. And our pirate pizza parties are a big hit during the summer. There's no puppetry involved in that, but we'll get everybody to get into some pirate gear. We create this whole
does that
story.
without the parties. Coonan dresses up as a pirate all the time. I'm just getting that out of the way.
I'm going to do it after this interview.
It's a weird thing. Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, today is National Speak Like a Pirate Day.
Is it really? That today?
I think so.
And I know it comes around every year. I wasn't sure what day though.
I was going through my time hop earlier and I was like, oh, Speak Like a Pirate Day. It's got to be today.
Wow, that sounds like fun.
We do a lot to keep the community engaged. We like to keep our doors open, make sure people know what's going on. We just recently in the last year, since I took over, we started bringing in musicians to have sort of solo nights. But in the last year, we've resorted to full band performances. We've been doing full concerts with local bands. That's been an awesome experience to reach the older audience, and it's been a great venue for them to come and showcase what they do, sort of outside the tradition of performing at some of the bars and restaurants around here. You have a theater venue and you're surrounded by puppets and lights and glitter, and it doesn't come with the same expectations of the traditional scene.
Right. Did they incorporate puppets into their performances?
So far, every one of them that's come here has found a way to do so, and that always makes me happy because I don't expect them to do it. You're using the space. I love having people here. I love having people create in the space. But to have them be like, I want to incorporate a puppet into this. I want to do something with the puppets here. it shows everybody's a kid at heart. Everybody wants to go back to that and be a part of that world.
Wow. So you rent the place out also as like a venue rather than just keeping the main business.
I do rent it out, but I do try and keep a hand in everything as well.
Right.
So I'll rent out to improv troupes, other theater troupes. They'll come here and perform. But I like to make sure that I'm involved as well, just to like show that, you know, we're bringing in content that we support and condone and are a part of. And so we're bringing our audience to meet their audience, and we're all coming together to have that experience, to showcase what Long Island has to offer.
Oh, wow. So you're curating the performances yourself. Like you're basically you're the booking agent. And it's still kind of your show because you're the one who's determining who gets to play and what the audience sees. That's cool.
Yeah, I like to make sure that everything is good for all of our audiences, or I know like how to market it. After hours, I run a horror themed podcast, and we run a section of the Long Island International Film Expo.
Oh, wow.
It's horror only section, Scared for Your Life. And we do all that here as well. So I always make sure that when I'm marketing things like that, that kind of gets separated from my general audience.
That is cool. That's cool. It's like, I don't believe Dave has been inside, but it's really the hidden gem that I'm glad is not so hidden anymore. Because it's really, it's such a cool place.
I would love to have you guys here once things are safe to do so again.
Oh, I'd love to come by. Absolutely. I feel like I missed out when I didn't get to see it before this whole thing went down. Because I love theaters, and this just sounds so different than what I know and what I'm used to. I tried last year with my kids to do a puppet show. It actually turned out okay, believe it or not. It took almost the entire school year to find the scripts, rehearse them, create the puppet characters, and do a final performance. Like literally almost the entire school year. But I gave a bunch of 11 through 13-year-olds socks and arts and crafts materials, and I covered a science fair board in a black tablecloth, and I gave one script, I think it was Little Red Riding Hood, and I gave another group Sleeping Beauty, and I appointed a director for each one, and I said, go. And they figured out how to tell these stories with, like, they created 3D backgrounds, and it's amazing what kind of creativity comes out when you just sort of let them go.
I love that you did that. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, and I have it on video. I will gladly send it to you when this is all done.
Yes, please.
Just so you can see the kind of insanity that a bunch of middle school kids and a director who has no idea how to do puppets, what we created. But I think in the future it would be amazing for you to, do a workshop with them. I think it would be incredible.
Absolutely. I have gone to schools doing workshops and things like that, just to, get people accustomed to, sort of like you just mentioned, you took things like science fair board and socks and craft material. It's all about being resourceful. So we like to showcase that. We like to show people what you can do with what you've got at home. Mm-hmm. Most of my puppets, when I go paper mache, it's just toilet paper and glue.
See, that's apparently a lot of people are making toilet paper puppets nowadays, I think.
Yes.
I actually ran into that at the beginning of the quarantine.
Did you really?
I started a craft where I was going to teach them how to make a paper mache puppet in the style that some of the puppets they'll see here are. Mm-hmm. And I announced the day before, your materials list, all you're going to need is toilet paper, water, and glue. And cool, we're going to do that. So I did the whole craft. I had a lot of people tune in. And then afterwards, I got a lot of people who were like, I watched, I couldn't follow along. Now's not the time. This isn't the time to be using these resources and materials. And like, I totally understand that. But
of course, yeah.
I'm so happy to see toilet paper back on the shelves at this point.
So much of it. There's so much.
I'm so happy to see anything back on the shelves at this point.
Yeah.
With you on that. Yeah. So you do videos and instructional things for building puppets?
I've been doing that more so recently since the pandemic hit. It's definitely made me rethink how I approach my audience and what I can be doing to, sort of keep us in mind. Mm-hmm. So those have been more recent, and I'm currently updating because we did them as live videos the last 2 crafting performances we did. And the live feed is great for the moment, but it doesn't make for great recapture as much as it sits active on our Facebook. The quality is not the best. So I'm going in and re-updating those so that they have a better, easier to follow quality video for that. But prior to that, I would do little short clips with our mascot, Kirby. We would just do things like the beginning of back to school, just to check in. You know, he did an announcement about not being scared on your first day at school, about not being scared about transitioning schools, just little things to put our puppets in the public eye and give them another way to connect to this world, even if they can't be here.
That's great. That's great. Well, I'm going to ask the obvious question right now. Can we see some puppets?
Sure. If you guys give me just 1 minute, I'll be back.
Absolutely.
So I've got Mr. Punch here from the traditional Punch and Judy story.
Now, is that a paper mache?
He is all paper mache.
Wow.
Whoa.
Paper mache, felt, glue. Keep a little cup to keep him in shape.
How long would it take you to make something like that, usually?
The hardest thing with something like Mr. Punch is the dry time on the paper mache, because he's a thick ball of paper mache. So I would give that about 1 to 2 days to dry. And we did that with the experiment of doing our teaching moment with the toilet paper and glue. So we had about a 1 to 2 day dry time. And
so he's a toilet paper puppet.
Yep. His head is just a roll of toilet paper and glue.
Wow, that's cool.
You've done more with a roll of toilet paper in a couple of days than I have in my entire life. So
it's just all about what you've got around you. I've got another puppet here that it's the Cavalier from our Ghosts of Goresthorpe Grange. That was the full-scale Sir Arthur Conan Doyle show that we did.
Okay.
His mouth is a mousetrap.
Really?
Oh, okay.
I'll be right back with him. Okay, so I'm back with the Cavalier.
Wow.
So our performer would be directly on stage with him, all about working the performance to disassociate who their original character was from who the character of the Cavalier was, because they're presented together. But he sort of floats a little bit in front of to make that disconnect an arm's length away. And his mouth is just a mouse trap and a string.
That is insane. That is so cool.
So I have a little trigger mechanism inside of his costume. I slip my hand in through the back.
Huh.
And I can make him talk.
Now, what was the process of that one putting together? How long was that?
So for Mr. Punch, I'd probably say about a day or two. For the Cavalier, this was a lot of trial and error, just finding different ways to make this mechanism work. But I would probably say I spent about a week on him.
It's actually less time than I thought.
I tend to just kind of get in a zone when I start building.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's my only focus until it's done.
That is so clever.
Yeah, it's almost like anytime you do something creative like that, it's almost a little kind of like a meditative thing. Like you just kind of get lost in it. It's your own little meditation. Just you're in it. Nothing outside could kind of get into your zone.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
You've got a clear presented goal, and it's enjoyable, and you're free to create it any way that you want it. Yeah, even just thinking about the design work that went into creating the Cavalier. We were doing a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle ghost story, but the design of the Cavalier itself, with his sort of gray complexion, almost stone-like, comes from another traditional ghost story called Man-Sized in Marble, which is about a stone knight who comes to life. So you just kind of let your imagination run away with it.
Are there any like rules that you follow when you're making a puppet? Like or is it just trial and error? Like, or is there like an instruction book where you learn how to make puppets and then you just kind of go from there? I'm just curious about the creative process of it.
There are a few different books out there that are fantastic resources. And I love to go back to them just sort of to see how other people have done it. But really, there's no rules and no guidelines to how you do it. There are a bunch of more professional ways to make the mouth mechanism that I made, but due to time constraints, budget constraints, and resources I had around me, I was able to create the exact same method with a mousetrap. So really, it's more about how, as long as the end product functions the way that it needs to, that's all that really matters. I have one of my marionettes here who I'll bring out, and for them, it's all about the unique process that you want for your mobility. Everybody's got their own way of stringing it. There are a bunch of different styles of crossbar. You guys have probably seen the one that's just like an X, and that's the most traditional one. It'll hold about 4 different movements. Then there's the airplane, which is the one that I use, which is sort of just 2 crosses. And there's a European style crossbar, which hangs directly down, and it holds so many different functions, but it's all about what you want your puppet to do. So you can restring it any way that you want. I know people who have made instead of a crossbar, they'll use things like clothes hangers, or there are people who they want their movements to be so minute and fine-tuned, and their puppet isn't very far from where their hand is, so they'll just use rings on each finger that control each of the pieces of mobility as well.
Wow.
So it conveys the same style of puppet, but it's really about the puppeteer and the creator's level of comfort and what they expect to achieve with the puppet.
Wow.
I'll be right back with him.
Yeah, great.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So rather than the paper mache that I use most often, he's all hand-carved balsa wood. He is one of the first puppets that I made when taking over. He's done in a style that's very similar to the previous owners. It was sort of my way of doing a transitional show of what his style was versus my style. But his crossbar here, that's that airplane style. It's more like 2 crosses.
Oh, I see now. Yeah.
Oh.
And it's more for him about the support. So the support in his back allows me to use counter tension to make his head move, rather than focusing on a lot of strings on the head itself to make that movement. He's only got the 2 on his head, so the back and forth motion exists because of the counter tension in his back. And instead of giving him individual hand movement, I've got them looped through one singular piece here. So if I pull the left string, the right hand moves. If I pull the right string, the left hand moves. And everything is about gestures. I didn't give him a moving mouth because the distance away from the audience that he is on stage, it's more about reading his gestures than the actual movement of his mouth.
Wow.
That is incredible.
Yeah, it's very impressive.
Thank you.
That's so cool.
I'm gonna hang him back up. He probably weighs about like 4 pounds, so he gets tiring.
Oh, wow.
Oh, jeez.
We'll be right back. So that's sort of the process of how the marionettes go. I haven't done any that are too complex or have too many points of motion on them. So far, it's just been enough to convey the stories that I'm telling, which are more storybook style. But I do have a couple of performance puppets that they're sort of like, they've got one trick, and that is what their mechanisms were designed for. I have a lion with a lot of points of motion, and his whole thing is doing sort of a lion tamer's bit. So it'll be about opening and closing his mouth, or getting it to move a specific paw to give the kids its paw. So he's got a lot of points of motion, but it all adds up to just really being able to perform that specific task.
And now on a puppet like that, on the lion, how many different strings would you have?
I think it probably has about 10 or 12. And the prince has, I think, 6 or 8.
Wow.
6.
How much practice does it take to master one of those marionettes?
I have the luxury of being the one who built them, so I kind of go into them with this knowledge of how it should function.
Okay.
Emphasis on should. I've had a lot of times where I've had to completely restring something, but it definitely takes a fair amount of rehearsal. I'd probably say if I'm doing, say, a 10-minute performance with something like The Lion, I'll probably put in about 3 hours of rehearsal time to get those 10 minutes to be the way that I need them to be.
Jeez. Wow. Have there ever been any nightmare performances where you just tangled strings or something or something?
We had one particular incident during our run of The Little Mermaid where so the way that the backstage is set up, we have a series of hooks behind us for some of our puppet cast. So we can just reach behind us and bring them out on stage. Out on stage goes over the pit, so there's a drop. Okay. And then over the pit, we have a few other hooks, which are kind of for the main cast, so that they're easy to bring on and off. But there's a very quick transition in the show where we have to switch from the prince to our sea witch. And we went to hang the prince back up, missed the hook, dropped the prince into the pit. So my brother ended up having to take over puppeteering both puppets while I went down into the pit, got the prince, but I spent most of the show making movements with him on stage, trying to untangle him so that it didn't look like he was totally tangled, but it was such a mess. His legs were flipped over his shoulders, so I had to get the strings for the legs unwound from the strings for the hands to get him back to just a standing position in order to be up on stage for the next scene. Oh my God. It was just
Quinny, you can never complain when somebody misses their cue ever again.
No. At least their legs are in the right place.
Yeah. And we've just had shows where, say, I've got a puppet like the prince back here for maintenance. I've got a lot of things to do. I'm not the most on the ball person. I've left puppets back here and had to use like a substitute puppet to fill that character's role before. We did a rendition of Puss in Boots. Okay. And I forgot the ogre back here for restringing. So I was like, okay, what's the closest monster puppet that I have backstage with me to fill this character's role?
It's like puppet understudies.
Exactly.
Wow.
How many puppets do you have, do you think?
With my collection of puppets from around the world, I think we have the largest collection of antique marionettes on Long Island. There's over 200 of them between our showcases. Those don't get used. They're antique. Some of them are a couple hundred years old. Some of them are made of really delicate materials, and they're from all over. I've got puppets from before World War I that were handmade, and they weren't even made by a puppeteer. It was just, at the time, that's how you entertain your family. So this was just a family man's way of entertaining his kids. So they're a little bit more crude than the professional puppets I have, but they're a piece of history. They predate World War I.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Do you have them on display?
I do. I try and keep as many of them on display as possible. Mm-hmm. I have about 10 puppets that I'm in the process of repairing. I do all the repairs myself, and they're going to go into the showcase when they're done. And I just had a donation come in yesterday of another 10 puppets that need to be restrung.
Wow.
So we're well over 200 for our collection on display. Mm-hmm. And in the last 4 years, I've produced 7 main stage marionette shows, and there's probably about 6 to 10 puppets for each of those. So there's probably about 70 marionettes that I've made in that time. And then I create my hand puppets and my trick puppets as sort of one-offs, and there's probably about 11 or 12 of them as well.
Jeez, it's a lot of puppets. Wow.
What still drives you, man? Before we wrap this up, what still keeps you going? Because this is a lot.
Wow.
It's the joy. I'm sure you guys know it. You're up on stage, you're performing, I love film, I love television, and I love writing, but nothing compares to being there with your audience and seeing the reaction and hearing the reaction. I love being with the audience and seeing how they respond to certain things. I love hearing how they go and retell the stories of the shows that they saw here. It really is all about the audience and the way that they respond to things. There'll be moments where The Little Mermaid, we have this, build up until she appears. And almost always in our audiences, I'll hear a kid under 5 years old gasp and just whisper to their parent, "She's beautiful." And that is an incredible moment. Or when there's something totally ridiculous that's happened and all of them are hysterically laughing.
That's great, man. Well, thank you so much. Are you cool, Dave? I mean, did you have any more questions?
No, man, that was awesome.
Thank you.
Totally.
Thank you guys so much for having me and making this happen.
Thanks for what you're doing for our home, for Long Island and everything, and bringing some joy to it.
You guys as well, keeping theater alive and really doing great work. I look forward to when we can do this together in person. Absolutely. And you guys can come and tour the theater as well.
Oh, I'd love to. Absolutely love to. Well, hopefully this whole thing ends soon so we can actually do that, because we'd love to come by and check it out and get on that stage and see what it looks like. It'd be so cool. All right. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Thank you, man.
Thank you, guys. Be well, be safe.
You too.
You too.